My daughter was lying on the floor when I walked into her living room that Tuesday afternoon, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Maya's body was crumpled near the marble coffee table, one arm twisted at an unnatural angle beneath her, a thin line of blood trailing from her temple down to the cream-colored carpet that I'd helped her pick out 3 years ago when she and Damien first bought this house. Her eyes were closed, her face pale in a way that made my chest constrict with terror. I dropped my purse and ran to her, my knees hitting the floor hard enough that I'd feel it later, but I didn't care. "Maya, Maya, sweetheart, can you hear me?" My hands were shaking as I reached for her neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, faint and fluttery, but there. Thank God, it was there. That's when I heard footsteps rushing down the stairs, heavy and quick, and I looked up to see Damien appearing in the doorway. My son-in-law's face was the picture of concern, his eyes wide, his expensive suit slightly disheveled as if he'd been loosening his tie. But something about his expression struck me immediately as wrong. Not shocked enough, not panicked enough, almost rehearsed. "Helena, thank God you're here." He moved toward us, and I instinctively positioned myself between him and Maya. "I just got home from work and found her like this. I already called 911, they should be here any minute." I stared at him, my mind racing even as I kept one hand on Maya's wrist, feeling that precious, fragile pulse. Damien worked at Meridian Capital Partners in downtown Greenwich, a 30-minute drive on a good day. It was 3:15 in the afternoon. Why was he home so early? And why did he look like he'd been here long enough to make a phone call, compose himself, and come up with that perfectly delivered explanation? What happened? My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I was 57 years old, and I'd built a multi-million-dollar financial consulting firm by trusting my instincts. Those same instincts that had never quite warmed to Damien Croft, no matter how many family dinners he'd charmed his way through with that calculated smile. "I don't know." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture I'd seen him make countless times when he wanted to appear vulnerable. "I walked in and she was just lying here. Maybe she fell? Hit her head on the table?" The explanation was plausible. The marble edges of that coffee table were sharp, dangerous even. But something in the way he said it, the way his eyes didn't quite meet mine, made my stomach turn. I'd spent 20 years reading people in boardrooms, detecting lies in quarterly reports, sensing deception in investment pitches. This felt like deception. The ambulance arrived with sirens that seemed to tear through the quiet Westport neighborhood. I held Maya's hand as the paramedics worked, murmuring to her, even though she couldn't hear me, telling her she'd be okay, that I was here, that everything would be fine. Lies, maybe, but the kind of lies mothers tell their children when the truth is too terrifying to speak aloud. I rode in the ambulance, watching the EMTs work with efficient, frightening urgency. Maya's eyes never opened. The blood from her temple had been cleaned away, but I could see the swelling beginning, the way her face was changing color in a way that made my throat tight. How long had she been lying there before I arrived? How long before Damien called 911? The question lodged itself in my mind like a splinter, sharp and impossible to ignore. At Yale New Haven Hospital, they rushed her straight into emergency surgery. Something about swelling in her brain, pressure that needed to be relieved immediately. I stood in the hallway outside the surgical unit, my hands still trembling, and that's when I remembered the security cameras. 3 years ago, when Maya and Damien bought the house, I'd given them a complete home security system as a wedding gift. Top-of-the-line cameras, both inside and out, with cloud backup and remote access. "Just to keep you safe," I'd said at the time, though Maya had laughed and called me overprotective. Damien had thanked me with that charming smile that never quite reached his eyes. Now, standing in that hospital hallway with my daughter in surgery and my son-in-law's perfectly delivered explanation echoing in my mind, I pulled out my phone with shaking fingers. I'd helped set up the system, knew the password, had access to everything. I'd never once checked the cameras in 3 years, respecting my daughter's privacy, trusting that my gift was just that, a gift, not a surveillance tool. But trust was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. I found a quiet corner near the vending machines, opened the security app, and navigated to today's footage. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat as I selected the living room camera and scrolled back to 2:20 p.m., roughly an hour before I'd arrived. What I saw made my blood run cold. Maya was on the couch, papers spread across that marble coffee table. Bank statements, I realized, recognizing the layout even on the small phone screen. She was on her phone, and even without audio, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was gripping the documents. Then Damien walked into frame. He didn't look surprised to see her. He looked angry. I turned up the volume on my phone as high as it would go, pressed it close to my ear. The audio was faint, but I could make out fragments. Maya's voice, tight with emotion. $340,000, Damien. Where did it go? His response was sharp, aggressive. That's none of your concern. Those are investment accounts you wouldn't understand. I understand that it's our money and it's gone. Maya stood up, clutching the papers. I'm calling my mother. She'll know what to do. That's when everything happened so fast. Damien lunged forward, reaching for the documents. Maya pulled back, turned toward the door. He grabbed her arm, yanked hard. She stumbled, lost her balance, and her head connected with the corner of that marble table with a sickening crack that made me gasp out loud even through the tiny phone speaker. The papers scattered. Maya crumpled to the floor, exactly where I'd found her an hour later. And Damien froze. I watched him stand there for what felt like an eternity, staring down at his wife's motionless body. Then he looked at the papers, at the blood beginning to pool beneath her head, at the door. The calculation on his face was clear, even through the grainy camera footage. He was deciding what to do. What he did was step over her body, walk out of frame toward the stairs, and disappear for exactly 14 minutes according to the timestamp. When he came back down, his expression had changed completely. Gone was the panic, the guilt, the fear. In its place was that same controlled concern I'd seen when I arrived. He pulled out his phone, made a call. I could see his lips moving but couldn't make out the words. Then he sat down on the stairs, just out of view of where Maya lay bleeding, and waited. He waited 10 more minutes before calling 911. 10 minutes while my daughter's brain was swelling, while precious time was slipping away. 10 minutes to get his story straight, to compose himself, to transform from the man who'd caused this into the shocked, concerned husband who'd just discovered his wife injured. The phone slipped from my shaking hands and clattered against the floor. A nurse looked over at me with concern, but I barely registered her. My mind was replaying those minutes over and over. The way he'd grabbed her, the way she'd fallen, the way he'd stepped over her like she was an inconvenient obstacle rather than the woman he'd promised to love and protect. The way he'd waited. Mrs. Washford? A woman's voice broke through my thoughts. I looked up to see a police detective, mid-40s with tired eyes and a no-nonsense expression. I'm Detective Lauren Castellanos. I understand you were first on scene when your daughter was found? I bent down, picked up my phone with trembling hands, and looked Detective Castellanos directly in the eye. I need to show you something. We sat in a small consultation room while I replayed the footage for her. I watched her face harden as she took in what I'd seen, the way her jaw tightened when Damien stepped over Maya's body, the way her eyes narrowed during those 10 minutes of deliberate waiting. "Where is your son-in-law now?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled. "I don't know. He said he was going home to get clothes for Maya, for when she wakes up." The words caught in my throat. When she wakes up. Not if. Detective Castellanos nodded slowly. "Mrs. Washford, I need to ask you to send me this footage immediately, all of it, and I need you to not speak to Damien about what you've seen. Can you do that?" "What happens now?" I asked, though I already knew. I'd seen enough legal dramas, sat through enough depositions in my business career. This wasn't just an accident anymore. "Now we investigate." She handed me her card. "Send me everything. I'm going to need to speak with you in detail, but first, I want you to be with your daughter. She needs you right now." She was right. I went back to the surgical waiting area, sent the footage to Detective Castellanos, and then I sat in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs and waited. My mind kept replaying the footage, but it also kept traveling back further, to 3 years ago when Maya first introduced me to Damien. I'd known then. Some part of me had known. He was too smooth, too polished, too quick with the compliments and the charm. When Maya announced their engagement after only 6 months of dating, I'd tried to voice my concerns gently. "Don't you think you should wait a bit longer? Get to know each other better?" Her response had cut deep. You spent 10 years building your company, Mom. You were at the office during my high school graduation, my college orientation, every important moment. Now that I finally have something good in my life, you want to ruin it? She was right about my absence, and the guilt had silenced me. I'd smiled at their wedding, written a generous check, given them that security system, and swallowed every doubt that rose in my throat during family dinners when I watched Damien's eyes assess the wine list with the same calculating look he gave everything else. The surgeon appeared 3 hours later, still in her scrubs, exhaustion evident in every line of her face. "Mrs. Washford, your daughter is out of surgery. We managed to relieve the pressure on her brain, but she's in a medically induced coma. The next 48 hours are critical. Can I see her?" "Of course, but I need to prepare you. She has significant swelling, and we won't know the extent of any damage until she wakes up." If she wakes up. The words hung unspoken between us. Maya looked so small in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed, tubes and wires connecting her to things keeping her alive. I pulled a chair close, took her hand carefully, avoiding the IV line, and for the first time since I'd found her, I let myself cry. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," I whispered. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm so sorry I didn't listen to my instincts about him. But I'm listening now, and I promise you, I'm going to make this right." My phone buzzed. A text from Detective Castellanos. "We picked up Damien Croft for questioning. I'll be in touch." I looked at my daughter's pale, swollen face, at the bandages wrapped around her head, at the machines breathing for her, and I felt something shift inside me. For 20 years, I'd built a business empire, navigated hostile takeovers, outmaneuvered competitors, protected assets worth millions. I'd learned to read people, to anticipate moves, to strike when the moment was right. Damien Croft had no idea who he was dealing with. He'd seen the overprotective mother-in-law, the woman with money who could be charmed and managed. He hadn't seen the woman who'd clawed her way to the top of a male-dominated industry, who'd turned a bitter divorce into the motivation to build something extraordinary, who'd learned that the best weapon wasn't anger, but cold, calculated strategy. He'd hurt my daughter. He'd left her bleeding on the floor while he constructed his lies. And now he was going to learn exactly what happened when you underestimated Helena Washford. I sat back in that uncomfortable hospital chair, still holding Maya's hand, and began to plan. I suppose I should have trusted my instincts from the very beginning, but guilt has a way of clouding judgment, especially the guilt that comes from being an absent mother during the years that matter most. Maya was 15 when my marriage to her father fell apart. Richard Washford, successful pharmaceutical executive, devoted husband for 18 years, father of one brilliant daughter. Or so I thought until I walked into his corner office unannounced one Thursday afternoon and found him with Jennifer Chen, his 28-year-old marketing director, in a position that left no room for misinterpretation. The divorce was ugly and public. Richard's company was publicly traded, and the scandal made headlines in the business section of the Connecticut Post. I remember Maya's face when she came home from school the day her classmates found out. She was 16 by then, old enough to understand every humiliating detail, old enough to feel the weight of whispers and pitying looks. "Why can't you just forgive him, Mom?" she'd asked me one night, tears streaming down her face. "Why does everything have to be so dramatic?" I'd tried to explain that some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, that staying would have destroyed me piece by piece. But 16-year-old girls don't want philosophical explanations. They want their families intact. The settlement gave me enough to start over, but starting over at 41 with a teenage daughter and a reputation as that humiliated wife required more than money. It required proving something. To Richard, to his mistress who was now his wife, to everyone who'd looked at me with pity at those corporate events I could no longer attend. So I threw myself into building Washford Financial Consulting. I worked 18-hour days, networked relentlessly, turned every contact I'd made as Richard's wife into a client relationship of my own. I was good at it, better than I'd ever imagined. Within 5 years, I had 23 employees and $7 million in assets under management. But those 18-hour days meant missing Maya's junior prom send-off, missing her senior recital where she sang a solo that her choir teacher said was breathtaking, Missing parent weekend at Cornell, where she was studying marketing and communications. I sent money, sent gifts, sent texts that I thought showed I cared, but I wasn't there. She graduated magna cum laude at 22. I made it to the ceremony, sat in the audience feeling proud and guilty in equal measure, watching this poised young woman who'd somehow grown up while I was busy proving Richard Washford wrong. For the next 5 years, Maya built her own career in New York City. We talked weekly, met for dinner monthly, maintained the relationship that many mothers and adult daughters have, cordial and loving, but not particularly deep. I told myself this was normal, that she was independent and successful, and that was what mattered. Then she met Damien. It was at some marketing conference in Boston. She called me breathless with excitement, talking about this brilliant trader she'd met, how charming he was, how he'd taken her to this incredible restaurant overlooking the harbor. I was happy for her. Maya had dated casually through college and her early 20s, but this was the first time I'd heard that particular tone in her voice. 6 months later, she brought him to dinner at my house in Greenwich. I remember opening the door and seeing him for the first time. Damien Croft was objectively handsome. There was no denying that. Tall, well-built, with dark hair styled perfectly and eyes that were striking in their intensity. He wore a suit that I recognized as Armani, carried himself with confidence, and kissed my cheek with exactly the right amount of warmth without being presumptuous. "Mrs. Washford, Maya's told me so much about you. It's an honor to finally meet the woman behind Washford Financial." The flattery was smooth, practiced. We sat down to the dinner my housekeeper had prepared, and Damien dominated the conversation with stories from his work at Meridian Capital, asking me intelligent questions about market trends, agreeing with my assessments with just enough independent thought to seem genuine. Maya glowed beside him, holding his hand, laughing at his jokes, looking at him with adoration that made my heart ache with happiness for her and unease I couldn't quite name. It was when he went to the bathroom between courses that Maya leaned forward, her eyes shining. "What do you think, Mom? Isn't he amazing?" "He seems very nice, sweetheart." I chose my words carefully. "How much do you know about his family, his background?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Why? Do you think there's something wrong with him?" No. I just think 6 months isn't very long, that's all." "You sound like you don't approve." Her voice had that edge I remembered from her teenage years. "I didn't say that. I'm just being cautious. You know how I am." When Damien returned, the warmth in Maya's eyes when she looked at me had cooled noticeably. The rest of the dinner was pleasant but strained, and when they left, Maya's goodbye hug was perfunctory. Over the next few months, I tried to get to know Damien better. I invited them to dinner regularly, asked about his work, his family. He was always charming, always had the right answers. His father had owned a textile business that had struggled during the 2008 recession. His mother had passed away from cancer when he was in college. He'd worked his way through business school at Columbia, landed at Meridian through pure determination and skill. The story was compelling, sympathetic even, but something about the way he told it felt rehearsed, like he'd perfected the narrative over many tellings. I did what any concerned mother with resources would do. I hired a private investigator. The report came back clean. No criminal record, no obvious red flags. Damien had indeed gone to Columbia Business School, though on student loans that were still being paid off aggressively. His father's textile business had gone bankrupt in 2009. His employment at Meridian was legitimate, his performance reviews solid if not exceptional. But there were small things. A pattern of jobs in his early 20s that he'd left after short periods, credit card debt that had been high and was now mysteriously paid off, an ex-girlfriend from graduate school who'd filed a restraining order that was later dropped with no explanation on public record. I sat with that report for 2 weeks, reading and rereading it, trying to decide if these were legitimate concerns or my own issues projecting onto my daughter's relationship. Was I being overprotective? Was this about Maya or about my own broken marriage and the betrayal I'd never quite recovered from? In the end, guilt won. When Maya called to tell me they were engaged, I heard the happiness in her voice, and I made a choice. I put the investigator's report in a drawer and never looked at it again. "Mom, I know you have some reservations about Damien," Maya said during that phone call, "but I love him. He makes me happy." Can you just be happy for me? Of course I'm happy for you, sweetheart. If he's what you want, then I support you completely. The words felt like a betrayal of my instincts, but they made Maya happy. And wasn't that what mattered? Wasn't that what a good mother was supposed to do? The wedding was beautiful. I spared no expense, made sure Maya had everything she wanted. The venue was a historic mansion in Newport, 300 guests, a band that had played at presidential inaugurations. I watched my daughter walk down the aisle in a Vera Wang gown, watched Damien's eyes fill with what looked like genuine emotion as she approached, and I told myself I'd been wrong to worry. I gave them the house in Westport as a wedding gift, along with that security system I'd insisted on. Just to keep you safe, I'd said, though truthfully, it was as much for my peace of mind as theirs. For the first 2 years, everything seemed fine. Maya thrived in her new position at a sustainable technology startup. Damien continued at Meridian, and they seemed happy in that comfortable way young married couples do. They came to family dinners, celebrated holidays, talked about maybe thinking about children in a few years. But about 6 months ago, something shifted. Maya's calls became less frequent, and when we did talk, there was a hesitation in her voice that hadn't been there before. She'd start to say something, then stop herself. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd laugh it off. Just work stress, Mom. You know how it is. I did know how it was, but this felt different. A mother knows. 3 months ago, she asked me about financial audits over lunch at a cafe in Westport. Hypothetically, she said, stirring her coffee with too much focus, if someone noticed discrepancies in joint investment accounts, what would be the first step? Whose accounts are we talking about hypothetically? I'd asked, my pulse quickening. Just a friend's situation. She thinks maybe her husband moved some money around without telling her. Tell your friend to demand full transparency immediately. Joint accounts mean joint decisions. If he's moving significant amounts without discussion, that's a red flag. Maya had nodded, changed the subject, but I'd seen the fear in her eyes that she was trying to hide. 2 weeks ago, she'd texted at 11 at night. Mom, can we have lunch tomorrow? I need your advice on something important. I'd been in back-to-back meetings all day and missed her calls. By the time I called back, it went straight to voicemail. Tomorrow's crazy for me, sweetheart, but Friday works. We'll go to that Italian place you love. Friday never came. Tuesday afternoon, I got a text from her. Mom, I found something. I need to talk to you today. Can you come to the house? I was in a strategy session with my senior partners, planning a major acquisition. I texted back, in meetings until 3, I'll come right after. At 3:15, I walked into her house and found her bleeding on the floor. Now, sitting in this hospital room watching machines breathe for my daughter, I kept thinking about all the moments I'd chosen wrong. The investigator's report I'd ignored, the hesitation in her voice I'd dismissed, the lunch invitation I'd postponed. Every choice made with good intentions or guilt, or the demands of building an empire. Every choice that led to this moment, where my only child lay in a coma, because I'd convinced myself I was being overprotective instead of trusting what I knew in my bones to be true. Damien Croft was dangerous. I'd known it from that first dinner, and I'd let Maya marry him anyway. The first 48 hours in that hospital felt like walking through water, every movement slow and deliberate, every breath requiring conscious effort. I didn't leave Maya's side, except to use the bathroom or take calls from Detective Castellanos, who updated me regularly on the investigation. Damien had been questioned for 6 hours before his lawyer arrived and shut everything down. He's claiming complete innocence, Detective Castellanos told me on the phone. Says he came home and found her exactly as he told you. We showed him the security footage. And? I gripped the phone tighter. He says the camera angle is misleading, that he was trying to help her when she fell, that the 10-minute delay was him being in shock, not knowing what to do. His lawyer is already talking about tragic accident, no criminal intent. That's insane. You saw what I saw. He grabbed her, she fell, and he stepped over her like she was garbage. I know, Mrs. Washford, and I believe you. But belief isn't enough for charges. We need more. I'm working on getting phone records, financial documents, anything that establishes motive and pattern of behavior. I hung up and looked at Maya, still unconscious, still swollen, still connected to machines. The doctors said the swelling was going down slowly, that her brain activity was good, but they couldn't tell me when or if she'd wake up. My phone rang again. This time it was my ex-husband. "Helena, I just heard. I'm flying back from San Diego tonight." Richard's voice was tight with emotion. "How is she?" I filled him in on the medical details, leaving out the part about the security footage and the investigation. Richard and I had maintained a cordial relationship over the years, primarily for Maya's sake, but we weren't confidants. "I'll be there first thing tomorrow," he said. "Have you called her office? Do they know?" Of course I hadn't. I'd been so focused on the immediate crisis that practical matters had slipped my mind. I made the calls after we hung up, speaking to Maya's supervisor at the startup, explaining that she'd had an accident and would be out indefinitely. "Oh my God, is she okay? What happened?" The young woman sounded genuinely distressed. "She fell at home, hit her head. She's in intensive care." "Is Damien there with you? He must be devastated." The question made my jaw tighten. He's dealing with things in his own way. That night, I slept in the reclining chair beside Maya's bed. Or rather, I tried to sleep. Every beep of the monitors jolted me awake. Every slight change in her breathing made me lean forward to check if her eyes were opening. They never did. At 6 a.m, my phone buzzed with a text from Detective Castellanos. "Need to meet. Can you come to the station at 10? I left Maya with a promise that I'd be back soon, kissed her forehead gently, and drove to the Westport police station with my hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. Detective Castellanos led me to a small conference room and spread documents across the table. We pulled Damien's financial records. "Mrs. Washford, I need you to look at something." The papers in front of me showed account statements from Meridian Capital Partners, transaction records, and what looked like internal audit reports. I'd spent enough years in financial consulting to know what I was looking at, and what I saw made my stomach drop. "He's been running unauthorized trades," I said, my finger tracing down a column of numbers. "Using client money for personal investment positions. This is securities fraud. That's what our forensic accountant thinks, too. And it gets worse." She pulled out another set of documents. "These are from the joint account he shares with your daughter. $342,000 withdrawn over the past 4 months, transferred to offshore accounts we're still trying to trace." Maya found out. The pieces were clicking together with horrible clarity. That's why she called me. That's what those papers on the coffee table were. "We think so. We're trying to get warrants to access his work computer and personal devices, but his lawyer is fighting us every step. The firm is cooperating, though. Turns out they had an internal audit scheduled for this week. Damien would have been caught regardless." "So he was desperate." I looked up at Detective Castellanos. "Maya threatened to tell me, threatened to expose him, and he panicked. That's our working theory. But proving it's assault rather than a tragic accident during an argument is harder than you'd think. His lawyer is already building a narrative about a loving husband and a tragic fall during a heated discussion about money. Without Maya's testimony about what actually happened, it's her word against his, except she can't speak right now." The frustration must have shown on my face because Detective Castellanos reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. "We're building the case, Mrs. Washford. Financial crimes, the security footage showing him waiting before calling 911, phone records that will prove he lied about when he got home. It's going to take time, but we'll get there. Time. Maya didn't have time. Every hour she stayed in that coma was an hour of her life slipping away, an hour where I didn't know if she'd ever wake up, ever speak again, ever tell me herself what had happened in those final moments before her head hit that marble table." I went back to the hospital to find Richard already there, sitting in the chair I'd occupied all night, holding Maya's hand and talking to her softly. He looked older than I remembered, grayer, the lines around his eyes deeper. 62 looked different on him than I'd expected. "Helena." He stood when he saw me, and for a moment, we just looked at each other across our daughter's hospital bed. The doctor came by. She said Maya's brain activity is strong, that she could wake up any time. Or she might not. I couldn't keep the sharpness out of my voice. "She will." Richard's voice was firm. "She's strong. She gets that from you." The compliment surprised me enough that I had to look away. "I need to tell you something about what happened. About Damien." I told him everything. The security footage, the financial fraud, the way Damien had stepped over her and waited. Richard's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, disbelief, and finally, rage. That son of a bitch. I never liked him. Something about him was always off. You never said anything. Neither did you. He looked at me pointedly. I figured if you, with all your business instincts, were okay with him, then maybe I was just being an overprotective father. We'd both failed her. The thought sat heavy between us. Over the next week, Richard and I fell into a routine. We took shifts at the hospital, one of us always with Maya. He'd stay mornings, I'd take afternoons and evenings. We'd overlap for an hour during the handoff, sitting on opposite sides of her bed, talking to her about memories from when she was little, before the divorce, before everything got complicated. Remember when she was 7 and insisted on wearing that fairy costume to the grocery store for 3 weeks straight? Richard said one afternoon. And you were mortified, but I told you to let her be herself. I smiled despite everything. You wanted her to be normal. You wanted her to be extraordinary. He looked at me over Maya's still form. You were right. Look at what she built for herself. Cornell degree, great job, independent. We did something right, Helena. Except she married a monster, and we both knew something was wrong, and neither of us stopped it. We can't change that now. We can only be here when she wakes up. When, not if. I appreciated his certainty, even if I couldn't fully share it. Detective Castellanos called on day 9. We found something. Damien's company laptop had deleted files, but IT recovered them. He's been running a scheme for at least 18 months, maybe longer. The total amount he's stolen or misappropriated is close to $2 million. $2 million. I felt dizzy. He was good at covering his tracks, moving small amounts from multiple client accounts, but he got greedy. The $340,000 from your daughter's joint account was him trying to cover his other losses. We're working with the SEC now. This is federal. What about the assault charges? The DA is reviewing everything. The combination of the security footage, the financial motive, and the proof that he lied about his timeline makes a strong case for assault with aggravating circumstances. The fact that he waited 10 minutes before calling for help, that's consciousness of guilt. We're building toward felony assault, possibly attempted murder if we can prove he understood the severity of her injury and deliberately delayed care. Attempted murder. The words made my hands shake. How long before charges are filed? Days, not weeks. His lawyer knows we're close. He's already reaching out about potential deals. No deals. My voice came out harder than I intended. He left my daughter bleeding on the floor to save himself. He doesn't get to negotiate his way out of consequences. That's not my call, Mrs. Washford, but I'll make sure the DA knows your position. That night, I was reading to Maya from one of her favorite books from childhood when I felt her hand twitch in mine. Just a small movement, barely noticeable, but it was there. Maya? Sweetheart, can you hear me? I leaned forward, my heart pounding. If you can hear me, squeeze my hand. Nothing. I waited, counted to 30, tried again. Still nothing. But I knew what I'd felt. I called for the nurse, who checked Maya's vitals and made notes, but didn't seem particularly concerned. These little movements happen sometimes. It's a good sign, but don't get your hopes up too much. The brain is unpredictable. But I did get my hopes up. I sat there for the next 3 hours, talking to her constantly, telling her about the investigation, about her father being here, about how much I loved her and needed her to come back. At 2 a.m, her eyes fluttered. Just for a second, but I saw it. I pressed the call button frantically, and within minutes, the room was full of medical staff. They ran tests, shined lights in her eyes, checked her responses. The neurologist, a woman named Dr. Patel, who I'd come to trust over the past 9 days, finally turned to me with something that might have been a smile. Her brain activity is increasing significantly. I think she's starting to wake up. It might happen gradually over the next day or 2, but this is very encouraging, Mrs. Washford. I called Richard immediately, barely able to get the words out through my tears. He arrived 20 minutes later, still in his pajamas with a coat thrown over them, and we stood on either side of Maya's bed, each holding one of her hands, waiting. She opened her eyes fully at 6:30 in the morning, 10 days after I'd found her on her living room floor. Her gaze was unfocused at first, confused, but then it landed on me and I saw recognition. Mom? Her voice was barely a whisper, rough from the breathing tube that had been removed 2 days earlier. I'm here, baby. I'm right here. Your dad's here too. What? She blinked slowly, trying to focus. What happened? You hit your head. You've been in the hospital for 10 days. But you're okay now. You're going to be okay. Damien. Her face contorted with effort, trying to remember. He was angry. The money. I was going to call you. Shh, don't worry about that now. Just rest. But she gripped my hand with surprising strength. He grabbed me. I fell. The table. Her eyes filled with tears. I couldn't move. I tried to get up, but I couldn't move. It's okay. You're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore. Where is he? Fear crossed her face. Is he here? No. Richard spoke for the first time, his voice rough with emotion. He's not allowed anywhere near you. Your mother made sure of that. Maya's eyes closed, and for a moment I thought she'd fallen back asleep, but then she squeezed my hand again. I'm sorry, Mom. You were right about him. You tried to warn me. None of this is your fault. Do you understand me? None of it. Dr. Patel came in, did a thorough examination, and declared it a miracle. Her cognitive function appears intact. We'll need to do more extensive testing, but the fact that she's speaking coherently, recognizing you both, remembering details, all of this is excellent news. Over the next 2 days, Maya's recovery progressed rapidly. Physical therapy started to address the muscle weakness from 10 days of immobility. Cognitive tests showed no apparent brain damage beyond some short-term memory gaps around the immediate trauma. She was moved from ICU to a regular room, and she told me everything. About discovering the missing money 3 weeks ago. About how Damien had explained it away at first, said it was investments he'd made, that she wouldn't understand the complexity of hedge fund operations. About how she'd kept digging because something didn't feel right. About finding evidence that he'd been using her connection to me, using information he'd overheard at family dinners about my clients to make illegal trades. I confronted him that morning, she said, her voice getting stronger each day. Told him I was calling you, that you'd know what to do. He lost it completely, started saying I was ruining everything, that I was ungrateful, that he'd done all of this for us, for our future. He grabbed your arm. He grabbed my arm and pulled so hard I thought it would break. I just wanted to get away from him, to get to my phone. I turned and my foot caught on the carpet and then... She touched the bandage on her head gingerly. Everything went black. Do you remember anything after? Voices. Sirens. Your voice. She looked at me with those green eyes so like my own. You kept telling me to hold on, that you were there, that everything would be okay. In the ambulance, you were unconscious, but I kept talking to you anyway. I heard you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Even when I couldn't wake up, I heard you. And Dad too later. You were both reading to me. Richard, who'd been standing near the window, turned away quickly, but not before I saw him wipe his eyes. Detective Castellanos came that afternoon with the news we'd been waiting for. Damien Croft was formally charged this morning with felony assault, securities fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. The DA added the obstruction charge because of the 10-minute delay before calling 911. His bail was set at $2 million. Will he make bail? I asked. His assets are frozen pending the fraud investigation. Unless someone posts it for him, he's staying in custody until trial. Maya listened to all of this with a strange calm. When the detective left, she looked at me steadily. I need to tell you something else, Mom. Something I haven't told anyone yet. The seriousness in her tone made my stomach clench. What is it? I'm pregnant. 9 weeks. I found out 3 days before this happened. I was going to tell Damien that night, after I talked to you about the money. I thought maybe it would change things, make him come clean, do the right thing. She laughed bitterly. I was so stupid. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. My daughter was pregnant. My daughter had been pregnant when that monster grabbed her, when she fell, when her brain swelled and her life hung in the balance. Have the doctors checked? Is the baby? They did an ultrasound yesterday. The baby's fine. Heart rate is strong. It's a miracle, really, with everything that happened. I sat down heavily in the chair beside her bed. A baby. Maya was going to have a baby. I was going to be a grandmother. Under different circumstances, this would be joyous news. Now it was complicated by violence and betrayal, and a father who was sitting in jail waiting for trial. What do you want to do? I asked carefully. I want this baby. Her hand went to her stomach protectively. I don't know how I'm going to do it alone, or if I even can, But I want this baby. You won't be alone. I took her other hand. You'll never be alone again. I promise you that. Maya was discharged from the hospital 3 weeks after the accident, though calling it an accident felt like a betrayal of the truth. The doctors wanted to keep monitoring her longer, but she insisted on going home. Not to the house in Westport where it happened, she'd never go back there, but to my house in Greenwich. I converted my entire second floor into a recovery suite for her. The master guest bedroom became hers, with a hospital bed I'd rented and enough monitoring equipment to satisfy the doctors. The adjacent room became a physical therapy space with equipment recommended by her therapists. I hired a private nurse to stay during the day while I worked, though I'd already cut my hours at the firm by more than half. Richard visited daily, sometimes staying for dinner, and it was strange how easily we fell into a rhythm that resembled something like a family again. Not the family we'd been before the divorce, but something new, built on shared purpose and love for our daughter. 3 days after Maya came home, Detective Castellanos called with news that changed everything. "We found a witness we didn't know existed," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "Your daughter's housekeeper, Cristina Alves." Cristina? I'd met her briefly a few times when visiting Maya. A quiet woman in her early 40s, Brazilian, always efficient and nearly invisible in the way good household staff learn to be. She was there that day. She saw everything. My heart started pounding. "Why didn't she come forward? Why didn't she call for help?" "That's complicated, and she wants to explain it to you herself. Can you come to the station? She's here now with her lawyer, and she specifically asked to speak with you before giving her official statement." I told Maya where I was going, saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes when I mentioned Christina's name. "She was there," Maya said quietly. "I remember seeing her in the hallway right before everything happened. She looked scared." Cristina Alves was waiting in the same conference room where I'd reviewed Damien's financial records. She was smaller than I remembered, or maybe she just looked diminished by guilt. Her eyes were red from crying, and she stood when I entered, wringing her hands. "Mrs. Washford, I am so sorry." Her accent was thick with emotion. "I wanted to help Miss Maya. God knows I wanted to help, but I was so afraid." "Sit down," I said, not unkindly. "Tell me what happened." She sat, and the story that came out was almost as devastating as what had happened to Maya. Cristina had been working for Maya and Damien for 18 months. She'd immigrated to the United States 8 years ago on a tourist visa that had long since expired. She had 2 daughters, 15 and 12, both born in Brazil but brought here when they were small. She worked 2 jobs to support them, sending them to good schools, dreaming of the day she could get her papers in order and make their life here legal and permanent. 6 months ago, Damien had discovered her secret. She'd left her purse open in the kitchen, and he'd seen her Brazilian ID, asked questions, done some digging. Then he'd cornered her one afternoon when Maya was at work. "He told me he would call immigration," Cristina said, tears streaming down her face. "He said my daughters would be put in foster care, that I would be deported and never see them again. He said if I wanted to keep working, keep my family together, I needed to be very quiet about everything I saw in that house. Never tell Miss Maya about arguments I heard, never mention phone calls he took in his office. Never cause any problems. He was blackmailing you into silence. Yes, and I was a coward. I needed this job, needed to stay invisible, needed to protect my daughters. So I said nothing when I heard him yelling at Miss Maya about money. I said nothing when I saw him throw his phone across the room after a work call. I said nothing about the woman who called the house phone when Miss Maya was away, asking for Damien, saying she needed to speak with him urgently about their situation. What woman? I don't know her name. She called 3 times over 2 months, always when Miss Maya was at work. She sounded young, upset. The last time, Damien screamed at her on the phone. I heard him say, "That's your problem, not mine," before he hung up. I filed that information away for later. "Tell me about the day Maya was hurt." Christina's hands twisted together so tightly, her knuckles went white. "I was in the hallway near the kitchen, folding laundry. I heard Miss Maya on the phone with you, saying she found something, that she needed to talk to you. Then I heard Mr. Damien come in through the front door. He was supposed to be at work. I heard him shout, 'What the hell are you doing?'" She'd moved closer to the living room entrance, staying out of sight but able to hear everything. Maya accusing him of stealing their money. Damien's voice getting louder, more aggressive. the sounds of papers rustling, furniture scraping, Maya saying she was calling me, that I would know what to do. Then I heard struggling. I looked around the corner and saw him grab her arm, saw her try to pull away. She fell so fast, Christina's voice broke. Her head hit the table with this awful sound. Mr. Damien stood there looking at her, and I thought he would help, call ambulance, something. But he just stared at her for the longest time. Then he stepped over her and went upstairs. Why didn't you call for help? I was so scared. If I called, he would know I was there, would know I saw everything. He would call immigration, take my daughters away. I know it was wrong. I know I should have helped. But I was frozen with fear, Mrs. Washford. I have never been so ashamed. But you're here now. Because I couldn't sleep. Every night I see Miss Maya's face, hear that sound of her head hitting the table. My daughter, my youngest, she found me crying one night, and I told her everything. She said, "Mama, what if that was me? What if someone saw me hurt and did nothing?" She was right. I had to come forward, no matter what happens to me. Detective Castellanos, who'd been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. Christina has agreed to full cooperation and testimony. In exchange, the DA's office is working with Immigration Services to get her a U visa, victim of crime visa, which can lead to permanent residency. Her testimony is crucial. There's something else, Christina said, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. I was on video call with my daughter when it happened. My phone was in my apron pocket. The camera was covered, but the microphone, it recorded everything. The argument, the sounds of the struggle, Mr. Damien's footsteps walking away, all the minutes he waited before calling for help. Everything. She played the audio. Maya's voice, clear and determined, confronting Damien about the money. His voice getting progressively angrier. The sounds of physical struggle. Maya's sharp cry, the terrible thud. Then silence, followed by Damien's footsteps on the stairs. Minutes of nothing. His footsteps coming back down. Finally, his voice on the phone with 911, perfectly calm, perfectly controlled, describing finding his wife injured. The contrast between the violence of what had happened and the smooth composure of his emergency call was chilling. This changes everything, Detective Castellanos said. With the security footage, the financial evidence, and now this audio with a witness willing to testify, the DA is considering upgrading the charges. This isn't just assault anymore, Mrs. Washford. This is attempted murder. I looked at Christina, this woman who'd been trapped by fear and circumstance, who'd finally found the courage to do the right thing, even when it terrified her. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Thank you for being brave enough to come forward. I should have been brave sooner. I will never forgive myself for those minutes I did nothing while Miss Maya was hurt. You're doing the right thing now. That's what matters." The trial began 4 months after Maya came home to live with me. 4 months of physical therapy that gradually restored her strength, of therapy sessions that helped her process the trauma, of watching her belly grow with new life while we prepared to face the man who'd tried to destroy her. Damien's lawyer tried every trick in the book to get the case dismissed or the charges reduced. They argued the security footage was inadmissible because Damien hadn't consented to being recorded in his own home. The judge shut that down immediately, pointing out that the cameras were a documented gift, properly installed, and that expectation of privacy doesn't extend to common areas of a home. They tried to exclude Christina's audio recording, claiming it was obtained illegally. Again, the judge ruled against them. The recording was incidental to a personal phone call, and Christina had every right to come forward with evidence of a crime. By the time we walked into that courtroom, the prosecution had built a case that was damning in its completeness. Financial fraud, assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, obstruction of justice by deliberately delaying emergency care, and yes, attempted murder, because the medical experts testified that 10 minutes without treatment for a traumatic brain injury could absolutely be the difference between life and death. I sat in the front row every single day of that trial, with Richard on one side and Maya on the other. At 21 weeks pregnant, she was showing clearly now, and I watched the jury's eyes go to her belly repeatedly, understanding dawning on their faces that she'd been carrying that baby when Damien hurt her. The prosecution opened with the security footage. The entire courtroom watched in silence as Maya confronted Damien, as he grabbed her, as she fell, as that sickening crack echoed through the speakers. Several jurors flinched. One woman covered her mouth. And then we all watched as Damien stepped over Maya's motionless body like she was an obstacle in his path, walked upstairs, and disappeared for 14 minutes. 14 minutes, the prosecutor said, her voice ringing through the courtroom. 14 minutes while Maya Washford lay bleeding on her living room floor. 14 minutes where Damien Croft could have called for help, but chose instead to cover his tracks, delete files from his computer, compose himself, and construct the lie he would tell emergency services. Damien sat at the defense table in an expensive suit that someone, probably his lawyer, had bought for him since all his assets were frozen. He'd lost weight in jail, looked paler, less polished, but his eyes were the same calculating eyes I'd seen across dinner tables for 3 years. When he looked at Maya, I saw no remorse, only resentment. The prosecution's case took 3 days. They brought in forensic accountants who walked the jury through Damien's fraud, showing how he'd stolen nearly $2 million from his clients, how he'd drained his and Maya's joint accounts to cover his losses, how the internal audit at Meridian Capital Partners was scheduled for the week after Maya's injury and would have exposed everything. They brought in IT specialists who testified about the files Damien had deleted from his work computer during those 14 minutes, files showing unauthorized trades, forged client signatures, falsified reports. They brought in Dr. Patel, Maya's neurologist, who explained in careful detail how traumatic brain injuries work, how every minute without treatment increases the risk of permanent damage or death, how Maya had been, in her professional opinion, extraordinarily lucky to survive with her cognitive function intact. In your medical opinion, the prosecutor asked, could those 10 to 14 minutes of delayed treatment have been fatal? Absolutely, Dr. Patel said without hesitation. Mrs. Croft had an epidural hematoma, bleeding between her skull and brain. Every minute that blood accumulated increased the pressure on her brain. If Mrs. Washford hadn't arrived when she did, if emergency services had been delayed even 15 more minutes, we would very likely be talking about a different outcome. I felt Maya's hand tighten on mine as the implications hung in the air. She could have died. Our baby could have died, because Damien had prioritized saving himself over saving her. On the 4th day, Christina took the stand. She was terrified. I could see it in every line of her body, but her voice was steady as she described what she'd witnessed. The defense attorney tried to tear her apart on cross-examination, suggesting she was lying to protect herself, that her immigration status made her testimony unreliable, that she'd waited months to come forward so clearly she wasn't that concerned. I was afraid, Christina said, her accent thickening with emotion. Mr. Croft, he told me if I ever caused problems, he would have my daughters taken away. I know it was wrong to wait. I know I should have helped Miss Maya right away. But I was a mother protecting her children, and he used that against me. He knew I would stay silent because he threatened the people I love most in this world. So you admit you're a coward, the defense attorney said with barely concealed contempt. Yes, Christina met his eyes directly. I was a coward then. I am trying not to be a coward now. That is why I am here. The honesty of it seemed to resonate with the jury more than any practiced speech could have. Then they played the audio. The entire recording, 14 minutes of it. Maya's voice clear and determined at first, then frightened, then the sounds of the struggle, the fall, the impact. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. We listened to Damien's footsteps walking away, listened to the minutes tick by, listened to him come back down and make that call to 911 with a voice so calm and controlled it sent chills down my spine. When the audio ended, the courtroom was completely silent. Even the defense attorney looked shaken. On day 5, Maya testified, I'd tried to prepare myself for this, but watching my daughter walk to the witness stand, one hand protectively on her swollen belly, nearly broke me. Richard's hand found mine, and we held on to each other like we had when she was in the hospital, united in our fear and love for her. The prosecutor took her through everything gently but thoroughly, how she'd discovered the missing money, how she'd done her research, found evidence of fraud, realized the scope of what Damien had done, how she'd called me that morning, desperate for advice. Why didn't you call the police directly? The prosecutor asked. Because I loved him. Maya's voice was quiet, but steady. I know that sounds stupid now, but I did. I thought maybe there was an explanation, maybe it was a mistake, maybe my mother could help us fix it without destroying his career. I wanted to believe the man I married was good underneath, that this was just a terrible mistake. What happened when you confronted him? Maya took a deep breath. He came home early. I didn't expect him. I was on the phone with my mom, telling her I'd found something, that I needed her help. He heard me. He was furious, started yelling about how I was ruining everything, how I didn't understand what he'd done for us, for our future. I tried to show him the bank statements, prove that this was serious, that we needed help. He grabbed my arm. Can you show the jury? Maya stood, pulled up the sleeve of her blouse. There was still a faint shadow of bruising on her upper arm, even 4 months later. He grabbed me here, hard enough that it hurt immediately. I tried to pull away. I just wanted to get to my phone, to get out of the room. I turned and my foot caught on the carpet and I fell forward. The last thing I remember is the corner of the table coming at my face. Do you remember anything after that? Not until I woke up in the hospital 10 days later. Her voice broke slightly. 10 days gone. 10 days where anything could have happened to me, to my baby. 10 days because he left me there and didn't call for help right away. The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal. He implied that Maya had embellished her injuries, that the confrontation had been mutual, that she'd been equally aggressive during the argument. He suggested that her pregnancy was a calculated move to garner sympathy from the jury. He tried to paint her as a scorned wife seeking revenge through the legal system. Maya handled it all with a composure I wouldn't have had at her age. When he asked her directly if she thought her husband had tried to kill her, she paused for a long moment before answering. I think he made a choice in that moment, she said carefully. A choice between saving me and saving himself. And he chose himself, whether he wanted me dead or just didn't care if I died. I honestly don't know. But I know he watched me bleeding and unconscious, and instead of helping me, he thought about how to protect himself from the consequences of what he'd done. That's not love. That's not even basic human decency. The defense called their own experts who testified that head injuries were unpredictable, that the delay in calling 911 could have been shock rather than calculation, that the security footage was ambiguous about whether Damien had pushed Maya or she'd simply fallen during an argument. They brought in character witnesses, colleagues from Meridian who said Damien was hardworking and dedicated, though notably, none of them said they trusted him with their money. Damien himself took the stand on the 8th day of trial. It was a calculated risk, and I could see his lawyer wasn't happy about it. But Damien had always believed in his own charm, his own ability to talk his way out of situations. He wept on the stand, actual tears running down his face as he described coming home to find his wife injured, the panic he felt, how he froze in shock and didn't know what to do. He claimed the security footage was misleading, that he'd been trying to keep Maya from falling when she pulled away from him. He said the 14 minutes felt like seconds to him, that he was in shock, that he couldn't think clearly. I love my wife, he said, looking directly at the jury. I made mistakes with money, I admit that. I got in over my head trying to give us the life I thought we deserved. But I would never, ever hurt Maya intentionally. That fall was an accident. Everything after was me being paralyzed with fear and guilt. The prosecutor destroyed him on cross-examination. She played the 911 call recording, made him listen to his own calm, composed voice reporting the incident. Does that sound like a man in shock and panic to you, Mr. Croft? She walked him through the financial fraud step by step, made him admit to each theft, each forged signature, each unauthorized trade. She asked him about the deleted files, made him explain exactly what he was doing upstairs for those 14 minutes, if not covering his tracks. You testified that you love your wife, the prosecutor said. Do you love her enough to admit what you did? To stop lying and tell this jury the truth? I am telling the truth, Damien insisted. But even I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. You grabbed your wife hard enough to leave bruises that were still visible months later. You watched her fall and hit her head hard enough to cause life-threatening brain injury. You stepped over her body and went upstairs, not to get help, not to call 911, but to delete evidence from your computer. You waited 14 minutes before calling emergency services, And when you finally did call, you lied about when you got home and what you'd witnessed. You lied to the police. You lied to your mother-in-law. And you're lying to this jury right now. I'm not lying. But his voice had risen, that charm cracking, and I saw flashes of the man from the security footage, the one who'd grabbed Maya's arm with fury in his eyes. Your wife was pregnant when you hurt her. Did you know that? No. The word came out strangled. She was 9 weeks pregnant with your child, and you left her bleeding and unconscious on the floor while you saved yourself. What kind of man does that, Mr. Croft? I didn't know. He was shouting now, all pretense of the calm, loving husband gone. I didn't know about the baby. If I'd known— If you'd known what? You would have called for help sooner? You would have cared that you were letting your wife and unborn child die? The fact that you needed her to be pregnant for her life to matter to you tells this jury everything they need to know about who you really are. Damien's lawyer called for a recess, and when we came back, Damien was composed again. But the damage was done. The jury had seen behind the mask. Closing arguments were predictable. The defense painted Damien as a flawed man who'd made financial mistakes, but wasn't a violent criminal. The prosecution painted him as exactly what he was, a narcissist who'd stolen millions, hurt his wife when she threatened to expose him, and then left her to die while he covered his tracks. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. 7 hours where I sat in the hallway with Maya and Richard, unable to eat, barely able to breathe. Maya was calm in that strange way she'd been throughout the trial, one hand always on her belly, as if drawing strength from the life growing inside her. Whatever happens, she said quietly, I'm okay. We're okay. She meant her and the baby, but she looked at me when she said it, and I understood she meant all of us, this strange, reconstructed family we'd become. The verdict came back at 6:30 in the evening. We filed back into the courtroom, and I watched Damien's face as the jury foreman stood. He was pale but composed, still believing somehow that his charm, his lies, his carefully constructed mask would save him. On the count of securities fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Maya's hand tightened on mine. On the count of embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty. Richard leaned forward in his seat. On the count of assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, we find the defendant guilty. I held my breath. On the count of obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty. One more charge. On the count of attempted murder, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Damien's face went white, then red. He turned to look at Maya, and I saw naked hatred in his eyes, the real man finally visible without any mask at all. I stood up, positioned myself between his line of sight and my daughter, and stared back at him until he looked away. The judge set sentencing for 3 weeks later. Damien was remanded to custody immediately, and as they led him away in handcuffs, I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been holding since the moment I found Maya bleeding on that floor. Justice. Finally, justice. Damien Croft was sentenced to 18 years in prison, 12 years for the assault and attempted murder charges, with additional time for the financial crimes running concurrently. With good behavior, he might be eligible for parole in 12 years, but the federal charges for securities fraud meant he'd serve at least 85% of his sentence. He'd be 52 when he got out, his career destroyed, his reputation ruined, his freedom stolen, just as he'd tried to steal Maya's life. I felt no satisfaction in watching him led away from that sentencing hearing. No triumph, no sense of victory. Just exhaustion and relief that it was finally over. The civil suits came next. Maya divorced him immediately, reclaiming her maiden name of Washford. The court awarded her full ownership of the Westport house, though she sold it within a month, unable to bear the thought of ever walking into that living room again. The proceeds went into a trust fund for the baby. Meridian Capital Partners fired Damien and cooperated fully with authorities. Their clients filed a class action lawsuit that would likely take years to resolve. But Maya wasn't part of that fight. She'd already lost enough to that man. She wasn't going to lose any more years of her life to legal battles. Christina Alves got her U visa and began the process toward permanent residency. I hired her as operations manager at Washford Financial Consulting with a salary that let her quit her second job and put her daughters in better schools. She cried when I made the offer. tried to tell me she didn't deserve it after waiting so long to come forward. You were protecting your children, I told her. I understand that better than you know. What matters is that you found your courage when it counted. Maya gave birth to my granddaughter on a warm June evening, exactly 6 months after Damien's conviction. Sarah Helena Washford came into the world weighing 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and her mother's green eyes. I was in the delivery room, along with Richard, and when the doctor placed that tiny, perfect baby in Maya's arms, I watched my daughter transform into someone new. Still Maya, still my girl, but stronger, fiercer, more certain of herself than I'd ever seen. "Look at her, Mom," Maya whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Look what we made it through to get here." I couldn't speak, could only nod and wipe my own tears away as I looked at this new life, this fresh start, this beautiful child who would never know the man whose DNA she carried, but whose cruelty she'd survived before she was even born. The first year of Sarah's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and small miracles. Maya moved into the renovated carriage house on my property, close enough that I could help with midnight feedings and early morning wake-ups, but far enough that she had her independence. Richard visited weekly, bringing ridiculous toys and children's books, sitting in the rocking chair with his granddaughter sleeping on his chest while Maya napped. We became a family again, but different than before. Built on honesty this time, on presence rather than obligation, on the hard lessons we'd all learned about what really mattered. Maya went back to work part-time when Sarah was 6 months old, but she left the startup world behind. Instead, she joined a nonprofit organization that helped women escape domestic violence situations. "I got lucky," she told me one evening, as we watched Sarah play on a blanket between us. "I had you, had resources, had support. Most women don't. I want to help them." I was so proud of her, I could barely breathe. On Sarah's first birthday, we had a small celebration in my garden. Richard was there, and Christina brought her daughters, and a few of Maya's close friends who'd supported her through everything. As I watched my granddaughter smash her cake with gleeful abandon, watched Maya laugh with genuine joy for the first time in what felt like years, I thought about how far we'd all come. The investigator's report I'd hidden in that drawer 3 years ago haunted me sometimes. If I'd shown it to Maya, if I'd pushed harder with my concerns, would any of this have happened? Would she have married him at all? I'd tortured myself with those questions through the long nights in the hospital, through the trial, through those first difficult months after Sarah was born. But Maya had her own answer when I finally confessed about the report one evening after Sarah was asleep. "Mom, you couldn't have stopped me," she said gently. "I was in love, or what I thought was love. If you'd shown me that report, I would have been angry with you for interfering. I would have defended him. I had to learn this lesson myself, as painful as it was. But you almost died learning it. I almost died, but I didn't. And I have Sarah. And I have you, really have you, in a way I didn't before. And I learned that I'm stronger than I ever knew. Those are gifts too, Mom. Terrible, painful gifts, but gifts nonetheless. I'd spent 20 years building a financial empire, accumulating wealth and success and professional respect. I'd done it to prove Richard wrong, to show the world that I was more than a humiliated wife, to build something that belonged to me alone. But sitting in my garden watching my daughter and granddaughter, I realized that none of that mattered as much as being here, being present, being the mother I should have been all along. I sold 40% of Washford Financial Consulting to my senior partner and reduced my role to consultant. I worked 3 days a week now, spent the other 4 with Maya and Sarah. I was there for first steps and first words, for doctor's appointments and park visits, for the mundane and the magical moments that I'd missed with Maya. "You don't have to do this," Maya told me when I announced the change. "I know how important your work is to you." "You're more important," I said simply. "You always were. I just forgot for a while." 2 years after Damien's conviction, Maya started dating again. A lawyer named Michael who specialized in family law, who'd lost his own sister to domestic violence, who understood trauma and patience and the long road to healing. I liked him immediately, not because he was charming or polished or said all the right things, but because he made Maya laugh and he treated Sarah like she was precious, and he never rushed or pushed or expected anything she wasn't ready to give. When they got engaged, 18 months into their relationship, Maya asked me if I was worried, if I had concerns, if I wanted to run a background check. "Do you love him?" I asked. "Yes." "Does he treat you well? Respect you? Make you happy?" "Yes to all of it." "Then that's all that matters." "But yes, I'm running a background check anyway, because I'm still your mother and that's what mothers do." She laughed, and the sound of it was everything. I think about that Tuesday afternoon often, the day I walked into Maya's house and found her bleeding on the floor. I think about how close I came to losing her, how different our lives would be if I'd been 5 minutes later, if the security cameras hadn't existed, if Christina hadn't found her courage, if any one of 100 small things had gone differently. But mostly I think about the moment in the hospital, when she first opened her eyes and recognized me, how her hand had tightened on mine, how she'd said "Mom" in that scratchy voice, and it had been both a question and an answer, both a cry for help and a statement of trust. I hadn't protected her from Damien. I'd failed at that, ignored my instincts, let guilt silence my concerns. But I'd protected her after, had used every resource and connection and skill I possessed to make sure he faced consequences, to make sure she survived and healed and rebuilt. That's what mothers do. We don't always prevent our children from being hurt, no matter how desperately we want to. But we show up when they're broken. We fight for them. We hold them while they heal. We teach them that surviving isn't enough, that they deserve to thrive. Maya thrived. Sarah thrived. Even I, in my own way, thrived in this new life, built from the ashes of that terrible day. And Damien? Damien sat in a prison cell and had 18 years to think about the moment he chose to step over his wife's body instead of saving her. 18 years to understand that charm and manipulation and calculated cruelty only work until someone sees through the mask, until someone loves their daughter enough to never stop fighting. I saw through him. I fought, and we won. That's the story I'll tell Sarah someday when she's old enough to understand. Not about the man who hurt her mother, but about the women who refused to let that hurt define them, about courage found in unexpected places, about families rebuilt on honesty and presence and love that shows up when it matters most, about justice finally served, about second chances earned and cherished, about coming home